So it's my unique pleasure to sit in front of you as an individual that can talk a bit about the generalities of technology across the board, what perils are out there from a cybersecurity standpoint, and how to prepare yourself across the board. So number one, I'm what you guys would call a nerd or a generalized technologist, which ultimately means I have social anxiety and typically fight back my heartbeat when I'm talking in front of folks like yourselves. So I am representing an organization that does cybersecurity infrastructure managed services across the board, and I'm here to answer any and all questions that you may have about how to prepare yourself from an organizational standpoint when it comes to computers, servers, as well as overall infrastructure.
Good morning. Again, my name is Bart Gaetjens, External Affairs Manager at Florida Power and Light. As we head into hurricane season, I think we've learned a lot of lessons. But right now, what we need to know is that now is the time to prepare. So when you start thinking about gas for your generator, yes, we can't guarantee you're going to have power because Mother Nature is going to dictate to us how the storms hit our service territory. So think about gasoline now. You know, you could have bought it a couple months ago for $2 a gallon. Now it's $3 a gallon. But still, gas is something that you can safely store in cans in your garage. And then once we get to November and it starts to cool off and we don't have the storms out in the tropics or the Atlantic, you can always put it in your car. Think about right now, when you're in Publix or another grocery store, think about looking at BOGOs, think about the items you're going to need, the non-perishable, unless you have a generator, the water, things like that. These aren't going to go to waste. So start stocking up now because otherwise you are going to be one of those people that will go viral. You'll be in Publix fighting over that last can of sardines for whatever reason people think they need to have. You know, when you think of hurricanes, the biggest question I always get, number one question is, when? Can anybody guess what number two is? Nobody's bold enough. Well, I'll tell you. Where? Where are your crews? And I can tell you because people expect to immediately see like the army rolling in and tanks and walking down the streets. That's not the way it happens. Where are our people? Well, we have a smart grid. We know you're out of power. We don't know what caused it, but we know you're out of power. So we are going to go in unmarked cars. Unmarked. So you're not going to see the FPL bucket truck rolling down your street. Why? There are a few people, and some of you might be guilty, that if you saw an FPL vehicle, you'd run out, jump in front of it, jump on the hood and say, it's only a palm frond over here. If you come over and remove the palm frond, we're good to go. And I'm back in power and everybody wins. It's not that easy. So there's a lot of patrolling because, you know, in World War II, General Eisenhower and General Patton didn't say, the Germans are on the other side of that hill, just go over and start fighting. No, you had to have a plan. It starts with patrolling. We've got to get out there and patrol. We need to know, are there broken poles? We don't send crews out there and say, oh, go take care of this, and then they come back and say, well, we got to get a pole, that's just going to delay the process. So we have a plan. And it starts with, we're going to go to the critical infrastructures in this county. What are the critical infrastructures? Hospitals, 911 communication centers, and we're going to take them from the substation all the way to that facility to make sure they're hot. How do we do that? We work with the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center. Every year we sit down and say, here's a list of what we think are the number one priorities in this county that we can handle with the local crews. We have to wait until the winds stop blowing under 35 miles an hour. Because when the buckets get up there above 35 miles an hour, we're putting our people at risk. So even if the storm's still blowing, it's still raining, it's 20 miles an hour, we're going to be out there working, even though the storm hasn't completely passed. We just have that threshold for safety for our employees. So we get to these critical infrastructures, we start repairing them. Now, after that, we go to the feeders. What is a feeder? Well, think of transmission lines first. Transmission lines would be like I-95. It's your corridor that has the most traffic, so that's where your high power is coming from. Then we drop it down to feeders. What are feeders? US 1, Babcock, Malabar, places like that, you'll see feeders. Then you get into laterals that are in your backyard, in front of your house, as it may well be. So I live up in Titusville County. I live in God's country. I realize my power is not going to come back on immediately. It's not going to be a priority. No, I don't get preferential treatment either. Even though my wife will say, can you please talk to somebody? No, it's not going to happen. So realizing that, the biggest bang for the buck, if we can go over and get the feeder in Melbourne on 192, and it gets 3,000 people on, versus my feeder that might get 300, now you know what the priorities are. So that's kind of the priorities. We've invested $5 billion with a B, since 2005. Remember Charlie, Francis, Gene, and I think there was another one in there that hit us that year. They just kept coming at us. Now this hardening, we build the infrastructure to withstand storms up to 130 miles an hour. Why not 150? More than likely at 130, you're not going to have a roof. So what good is it to say, well, at least the power pole's out front. I don't have a house, but hey, we got power when the time comes. Vegetation management. We spend a lot of money. Trees are our #1 issue during storms. You know, we harden the infrastructure, so you're putting in bigger poles, stronger poles to withstand, better guiding, shorter spans between the poles. But when you have trees, and it's not just trees falling on the lines, it's things blowing into it. So you have a fault. If there is a branch that is just laying on top of that feeder, until we get it off, it's not going to go back in. Because just like your circuit breaker, it's reading that there is an unsafe condition there. There is a fault. So it's going to trip because it's going to protect your equipment. At home, it's going to protect our equipment. So you look at all this investment, it's the right thing to do. You're taking capital costs, but you're reducing your operating and maintenance. Because a lot of this now is automated where we don't have to send someone out. You don't have to wait for someone to clear a ticket to go over and work this ticket. All right, maybe during storm it's a little bit different, but day-to-day operation, there are things called automated feeder switches. What are they? They will detect and determine where the fault is, try to isolate it. In the meantime, it'll start back feeding. First time I saw this was in Cocoa Beach. Somebody decided driving at nighttime that they would play chicken with a pole, an electric pole. Well, they lost. But in doing so, they took down the pole. That can usually affect up to 3,000 people for hours. Now you got to go get a pole, you got to get an auger, you got to get the manpower, you got to transfer everything. It's a long process. But what happened here was this feeder switch started automatically backfeeding to the point where the fault occurred, where the pole was down. So those people still had to wait. But everybody else on that feeder started to get their service back. And that's what happens during hurricanes. That saves a lot of outages. So you're investing in capital, but you're reducing that manpower need. Look at the economic development. You see every day, you go up and down the streets in your neighborhood, hopefully, but throughout the community, what do you see? A lane shut down. What's going on? Oh, there they are. They're putting in a new pole. That's economic development. These people come here. Some of them come from out of state. We hire a lot of contractors. They're putting dollars back in this community. So think of that as a true investment. And the other thing, appreciate that they are working it hot. What do I mean by that? Live wires going from the old pole, going over to the new pole. They make a mistake, it could cost them their lives. They have to bring their A game every day. But it's not taking you out of service. So we're not calling you up saying, Tuesday, forget about it. You're not going to have power all day because we're transferring. It may have been like that years ago, but now these guys are working it hot and it's dangerous. Another issue we often come up with is people ask, why does my neighbor have power and I don't? Why don't you like me? It's not a matter of us liking you. We love all of you. You're our customers. But what will happen is just like your circuit breaker at home, a fuse box, I'm an old guy so I can say fuse box, when you have something that goes on a circuit, so if you're barefoot and you're standing in water and you decide to take a knife and stick it in the socket to see, do a science experiment, well, guess what's going to happen? Your ground fault indicator is going to take that circuit out and say, there's a fault there, there's something dangerous, we're tripping. Okay, it could prevent a fire, it could prevent you from getting electrocuted. But when you turn that back on, let's say there's a bunch of them that went out. You know, you look at different areas of your house. This circuit might take care of this. Well, it might be the same thing. The lateral across the street may have not gone out at all. Or maybe we got the feeder hot, and that little lateral that they have, again, that might serve the neighborhood, it comes back on. But you're not on that one. So we're going to get to that one later, okay? That might have been because the feeder got hot and there was no damage to the lateral. You might be on a lateral that not only has damage to the feeder, but also to the lateral. A lot of people talk about undergrounding, and I can tell you, remember Tropical Storm Faye? You guys remember Tropical Storm Faye? It rained down here. Remember, just 3 days. It was like time to build an ark, because it was really getting bad. Well, there is an area, there's a manufactured home community right near the O'Galley exit, right off, you can see it off I-95. And that area, when it drizzles, starts to have flooding issues. All the water seems to accumulate there. Our underground service, the pad mount transformers, were underwater. So what could we do? We had to terminate the service for safety issues. We had to wait days, and then go in and clean up our equipment before we could get that restored. That is an area that never should have had underground. 60% of our service is now underground. Underground is great, but it's not a cure-all. When you have flooding in an area, it's not good. Day to day, it operates much better. But face it, during a storm, if you have an overhead line and it's snapped, it might be an easy splice and you're back in service. If you have an underground fault, we can't see it. We got to start digging. We are looking at putting all our services underground, but it's going to take time. It costs about $1 million a mile. So in your neighborhood, we might be coming in there. We'll be boring, won't be trenching and ripping up your yard, but we will be boring. We'll be removing it from overhead. The pole may still be in the background. You're in the backyard. You're going to have to wait for the cable company and your telephone company to transfer their service. They can join us, but we're not going to wait on them. We're going to put it out front. Why? Because during a storm, if you have a pole in your backyard and there's an issue, that becomes hand-to-hand combat. I mean, it really does. We've got to go in your backyard. We got to go past your dog. We got to go past your boat. We got to go past the shed, the tree that's grown over. Now we got to bring the pole in manually in a hand trailer. We got to replace the pole, or we got to climb up and do the transformer. That takes hours to restore versus an overhead line somewhere out front that we can get to, underground service. So those are some of the issues you run into. I just want to quickly touch on generator safety, and this is something every year we see it, and it's a tragedy that can be prevented. Your neighbor might have a generator, you don't. Your neighbor is going to try to be a good neighbor and say, I don't want the noise to keep my neighbor up at night because generators are noisy. They're not thinking, they're going to move it in their house. It might be a whole house generator large enough to handle AC. Guess what they've just done? They might have just killed themselves and their family. If you see that, just make sure, go over to your neighbors and say, keep that safely outside. It's going to be a few days at most. Hopefully we can get you back on quickly, but just let your neighbor know, hey, that's not bothering me. Please, keep safe. You know, think about what you're doing with the generator. Even people smoking cigarettes while they're pouring gas in the generator. I've seen it, trust me. Cybersecurity, I'll just touch on that real quickly. Cybersecurity is always a threat to us. Somebody is out there saying, boy, if I can take down the power grid and hold them hostage. So we go through exercises all the time. If I don't recognize an email sender, I'm not touching it. If it's an attachment and I don't know where it's from, I'm sending it to let the experts check on it to say, you tell me if we're okay. And I'll end on this, you know, something we're very proud of at FPL. Your rates right now are what you were paying in 2006. Let me repeat that. The rates you're paying right now are equivalent to what you were paying in 2006. I used to say that about gas, and probably nothing else except gas was at 2006, but gas is going up. So we have rates that are 30% below the national average. Our emissions, we just ended coal. No coal are we buying or are we producing and generating in the state of Florida. Okay, in our service territory, we have zero coal. Oil, we use next to nothing. It's natural gas, it's solar, it's nuclear. our emissions 30% below and dropping. Our plans are, you see, there's already 2 solar sites with about 300,000 per site. So our plan by the year 2030 is to install 30 million solar panels within our system. That'll take about 20% of our power generation. So again, clean carbon footprint, and we have won reliability awards. And this didn't happen by accident. It happens because you guys are supportive. You guys, the feedback is, we want to do what's right. We want to have you in power. We can recoup the cost of bringing somebody from Minnesota here. We can recoup those costs. What we cannot recoup is the loss of revenue, because when your meter's not spinning, we're not making any money. It's not good for you. It's not good for us. So all these things, the hardening, all the other things we're looking at for hurricane being prepared, this didn't happen by accident. You know, someone went to our CEO and said, you can't be reliable and affordable. It just doesn't happen. You can't be clean and affordable. It just doesn't happen. Well, we made it happen. A lot of planning, a lot of foresight, a lot of sweat equity, and of course, your support. So I just want to thank you, but be prepared, because they keep saying once this Sahara dust, and I'm rooting for Sahara dust, once Sahara dust goes away, look out. So let's be prepared, or shame on us. And I don't want to see you guys in Publix fighting with me over that last can of sardines, okay? So, any questions?
Oh, not yet.
Oh, no.